Hey everybody, Grommel's here with another War Thunder Simulator battle video. Now sadly the historic enduring confrontation mode is still not back, so I have to look at some battle rating based games instead. Now one plane I always want to take a look at is the Hawker Sea Hurricane 1C. So let's talk a little bit about the Sea Hurricane before we look at the battle in it. I think the Sea Hurricane 1C is an interesting plane in War Thunder, and by interesting I mean it is a hot contender for being the worst fighter in the game, at least in simulator battles. At least if you only count proper single-seat fighters, not multi-seat ones like the Firefly. Now that doesn't mean you can't have fun in the plane, but it is pretty poor. So why is that? Well, to answer that, let's take a quick look at the Hurricane and its history as a whole. Now, the Hawker Hurricane was already a somewhat outdated design when it entered service, with other new monoplane fighter designs of the time like the Spitfire or PF-109 using stressed skin construction, making them lighter. The Hawker Hurricane, on the other hand, with its prototype being derived from the Hawker Fury biplane, still used an older construction with a frame covered by a non-stressed skin. While that made the Hurricane a relatively rugged and easy to maintain design, it also made the plane comparatively heavy. On top of that, the plane wasn't as aerodynamically advanced, and the thick and large wing, while creating a lot of lift and giving the plane a good turn rate, despite its somewhat heavy weight, also created some extra drag. All that leading to the fact that the Hurricane was a slow plane compared to the Spitfire or PF-109. As a matter of fact, the Hurricane was slower than the twin-engine PF-110. Of course, the plane had its upsides as well. It was a good turner at slow speeds, and if a PF-109 thought it would be a great idea to go into a flat turning contest with a Hurricane, it would most likely lose. Also, at the beginning of World War II, the speed difference was not that huge yet, and the Hawker Hurricane does have a powerful Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. A Merlin 3 for the Hurricane Mark I, which at first ran with 6 pounds of boost and produced about 1030 horsepower maximum output. That was with 87 octane fuel. Now, in late 1939, however, larger amounts of 100-octane aviation fuel started to be available, and with this higher quality fuel, the same Merlin 3 engine could be modified to accept 12 pounds of boost, twice of what it was capable at before, and had the maximum horsepower output, which jumped to 1310 horsepower. About 300 horsepower more, a large increase which greatly increased the plane's power-to-weight ratio, and also its speed, of course. The Mark II Hurricane with its Merlin 20 engine with 100-octane fuel could produce up to 1490 horsepower. Now, as I said, this 100-octane fuel was available from late 1939 onwards in increasing quantity, and from what I can tell, a lot of Royal Air Force squadrons were switching over to it in early 1940. Even with the horsepower increase though, the outdated aerodynamics and thick wing slowed the Hurricane down, and it was less and less capable to keep up with more modern designs, as their horsepower also increased and were relegated more and more to ground attack duties as time went on. That's for the RAF Hurricanes. What about the Sea Hurricane? Now, the first Sea Hurricanes were converted from Mark Is to serve as catapult fighters for merchant ships. Simply a Hurricane strapped to a catapult on a merchant ship. In case of attack, the ship could launch this Hurricane to defend the convoy against, for example, long-range patrol aircraft like a Focke-Wulf 200. Now, since the merchant ships obviously did not have a flight deck, the Hurricane pilots had to either try to reach a land base when he was lucky enough to be close to one, or ditch next to the ship to be picked up by it. After that though, the Hurricanes were also converted to proper carrier-based fighters, with the 1B and 1C version. The 1C we fly here is basically a Mark I with the later C-wing with 420mm cannons fitted, as well as equipment for carrier operations, and they were built in 1942. Being a Mark I Hurricane, they were equipped with the Merlin 3 engines. And that's where it gets interesting, because as we saw, the Merlin 3 has a huge jump in power when it uses 100-octane fuel and 12 pounds of boost. And while the Royal Air Force switched over in 1940, it's hard to find info in what quantities the Royal Navy did so for its planes in 1942. There's evidence for both 1C Sea Hurricanes flying with the old 6 pounds of boost, as well as the newer engine settings, most notably the well-known story of the 1C Sea Hurricanes used in Operation Pedestal, which were further modified to even accept 16 pounds of boost and produce 1400 horsepower. Now, even with 1400 horsepower, the Hurricanes would have a hard time competing with other 1942-era planes. But it doesn't get this kind of horsepower in War Thunder anyway. The 1C Sea Hurricanes gets the original 6 pounds of boost, same as the Mark I. which we get in the RAF tree, producing a maximum of 1030 horsepower, and that is at altitude. Takeoff power is just 900. 500 horsepower less than the 1Cs used in Operation Pedestal and almost 500 less than the Hurricane 2B we have at Battle Rating 2.0. Now, while the 1C has the same horsepower than the normal Mark I Hurricane, the 1C is heavier thanks to its armament and carrier equipment, leading to the 1C being even slower and also turning worse. So you got the Hurricane that was outperformed in 1939, having less performance than a 1939 Hurricane in 1942. So now it is facing P-49Fs and Focke-Wulf 190s. And this is what makes the 1C one of the worst fighters in simulator battles at the moment, in my opinion. The plane is simply too slow. Everything the plane needs is faster, by a lot. Also, with the 900 horsepower at low altitude, the power-to-weight ratio is so bad that you lose speed so fast that you have to be careful not to fall out of the sky after a few turns. On the plus side, the plane does have a good armament, and it is very stable as a fire platform, which makes the armament easy to use. And as I've said, while the plane is bad, that doesn't mean you can't have fun in it. The Zero is also slow, though not as slow as the Sea Hurricane, which makes it a bad fighter in my opinion, but it is often a riot to fly nonetheless. Well, that's some info on the Sea Hurricane, so let's take a look at a few engagements in it. Here we have a battle on the New Guinea map versus the Japanese. Here you have to be careful, since a lot of the planes you meet aren't just faster, but they turn better too. I took off from one of the rear airfields and started to climb, hoping to get a good amount of altitude to be able to attack from above. Soon though a fight developed to my left and I changed course that way. Seems to be that a few aircraft are doing hit-and-run attacks from higher altitude on one or more lower planes. Seems that the planes doing the attacking from above are Japanese, so I figure they are most likely Raidens, as you very rarely see Zeros do that. When I get a closer look at the silhouette of the plane starting another dive, it is indeed that of a Raiden, and I hope I can intercept the plane when it is coming back up from its attack and losing speed. The Raiden is pulling up sharply after its dive and climbing back up straight, and right in front of me, and as it reaches the top of its climb and noses over, I can get close enough to fire a burst at it and get a few good hits which set the Raiden on fire. I follow it down as it dives and fire another burst or two, but I fall behind quickly, so I pull up again, and the Raiden goes down quickly anyway. Now I look back as I pull up, wondering where the other one is, and I don't have to wait long. The second Raiden comes diving down from above, but apparently doesn't get the angle to attack as I pull up and dives past, and then pulls up back towards me. I roll inverted and barrel roll down to get behind the Raiden, which in turn also goes into a wide barrel roll, and we end up in some rolling scissors, barrel rolling around each other. Now, in this kind of maneuver, the plane with the better turn rate can cut inside the other one, as the roll rate does not matter too much as you don't change direction. So I can get behind the Raiden, but with the Hurricane being very slow I also fall back a lot and I'm out of range. The Raiden, however, doesn't keep going, but instead goes into a split S and comes back around, passing below me, allowing me to get back behind it. The Raiden keeps up its turn as I get behind it, but my Hurricane is the better turner by quite a bit, so I can get lead and fire a burst, taking the second Raiden out. Then I take a look back and turn, and there are two enemy fighters, Zeros, coming in from above, guns blazing, and then pulling up and keep going in formation. That looked quite nice, though by how they are flying it seems pretty clear that they are NPCs. I'm not 100% sure about that yet though. It could also be a squad flying disciplined in formation, and doing such hit-and-run attacks with a wingman does, in my opinion, allow you to do better than wasting all your speed in turns at every opportunity, even in a Zero, so I call for some assistance and give chase. As I do so, one of the Zero turns hard to the right, while the other one is going more or less straight. Now, if they are not NPCs doing that just randomly, this is a good and well-known team tactic in a 2 vs 1 situation. In such a situation, the attacking plane coming in from behind, in this case me, has to decide to either go for the one turning tight to the right, giving the other one an opening, or follow the one that continued straight, in which case the one that turned to the right can attack from the rear. A typical pincer attack. And at the time I thought that this is what I was seeing. Turns out though they were just NPCs doing that randomly before buggering off. A third Zero, that one the player came in to attack, but overstressed his wings in the attack and went down. The NPC Zeros are also coming in once more, but by now it is 100% clear by the way they fly that they are indeed NPCs, and I'm not really interested in those. Also, a Spitfire is already on them, chasing them away. I can see some more planes towards the coast, so I start to head in that direction. I'm in a slow climb to get some altitude back while I move towards some contacts over the water, and I keep checking my rear in case I have some planes coming in from behind, and after traveling a bit I can indeed see a plane approaching from behind in low, a Hayabusa. The Hayabusa is more maneuverable than my Hurricane, but like everything else also much faster, so I can't outrun it. I have to outfight it or at least keep it at bay till assistance arrives. I go to split S and turn towards the attacker till we merge, then I roll into the other direction and barrel roll towards the Hayabusa, and we end up in rolling scissors again. The Hayabusa is better in roll rate as well as turn rate than my Hurricane, but his advantage is even higher in roll rate than turn, so I go for the rolling scissors where turn rate is more important than roll rate, unlike flat scissors. Still, the Hayabusa is getting the upper hand, and as he gets in fire position I give full rudder, pressing the nose down to move out of the way and turn into the Hayabusa again. That works and I can move out of the Hayabusa's line of fire, but the next time he comes around and is about to fire and I do the same, I have lost too much speed. The 1C Hurricane bleeds speed very fast and I start a plane. Also because I have to try to avoid too much negative G, which is making maneuvering more difficult. Anyway, throttle to 0, rudder against the spin direction and get the spin to stop, and then nose back down and pull out. Being careful not to pull out too hard to stall again, and at least this has thrown the Hayabusa off. He passes me as I pull out from my spin, and I turn after him, and then the Hayabusa turns around and comes towards me again. As we are about to merge, I pull up before he passes me and roll around to pull into the Hayabusa. This time I get the plane turned around faster and almost get a shot at the Hayabusa, but I miss. The Hayabusa comes around again and I try to get a shot again, but I can't quite pull the nose up enough to get hits. The Hayabusa, however, now decides that he has enough of those shenanigans and keeps going when I turn around after him. I try to follow, but I have of course no chance to actually catch up to the Hayabusa if he keeps going. I follow him a bit more, since I'm not sure if he just wants a bit of separation and then turn around to come back again, and if I break off I give the Hayabusa a good opportunity to get behind me again. Another reason why you want to have the faster plane, by the way, because you have the option to just fly away like this and look back at your opponent. If he keeps coming you just fly away, and if he gives up and turns away you turn around and you're behind him again. By now there are also a few Spitfires arriving, answering to my call for assistance a little earlier, and they have a better chance to catch the Hayabusa than me. So I pull up a bit to get some altitude and get above the Hayabusa's altitude and the Spitfires, keeping an eye on the Hayabusa in case the Spitfire gets close enough to it to get it to turn, so that I can assist if needed. As I do so, the Hayabusa does indeed certainly pull up and turn around and come back to attack again, however flying towards a Spitfire, not me. As I realize that, I roll around and get ready to attack the Hayabusa from the front when it comes in. The angle isn't great though, and I don't get a hit on it. As the Hayabusa turns, I use what little speed my Hurricane has to go straight up and get above the whole thing. No reason for me to try to turn right after the Hayabusa, it turns tighter than me and the Spitfires are already there, we just would be in each other's way. From above though I can simply dive straight down and slot in behind the Hayabusa when it turns after a Spitfire. So I line the Hayabusa up as I dive towards it and get a good hit in with the quad Hispanos, which takes the Hayabusa out. Now, after that and some climbing and looking around for other fights to join though, I get attacked by a Raiden from above. And this time it is not nice enough to go into rolling scissors fights with me either. No, just diving down with high speed, attacking and then pulling straight up again using its excess speed to zoom far out of reach. And this is of course exactly the kind of situation where the slow Sea Hurricane with its abysmally bad power-to-weight ratio has a very bad time. And another example of why speed is king for fighters. Now the Hurricane with its good turn rate and being somewhat maneuverable can turn out of the way of an attacker, though the success of that is not always guaranteed of course. But in case of the much faster Raiden or similar planes like a Bf-109 or a Focke-Wulf 490, they can zoom back up and attack again whenever they want. With its bad power-to-weight ratio, the Hurricane won't be able to equalize the energy state unless the pilot of the attacking plane makes a mistake. So you have to constantly keep an eye out for the next diving attack and then evading it, which wastes energy again. And the Hurricane is of course simply too slow to disengage from this kind of fight, so you have to keep evading, hoping that the enemy pilot makes a mistake or loses patience and you can lure him into a slower speed fight. But that is simply not under your control. The enemy pilot might very well simply refuse to lose patience and throw away his advantage. Another friendly plane coming in at high altitude intercepting the attacker as he goes back up is also a good way to deal with this. Now, after rolling and turning out of the way of diving attacks for a few more minutes, another Spitfire or two show up, and one Raiden eventually is forced to dive towards the deck. My Hurricane is of course not fast enough to follow it if it keeps flying straight, and neither are the Spitfires, so I pull up again, but just as I do so I can see that the Spitfire to my right is under attack, another Raiden going in for a diving attack. I try to get a shot at it, but I don't quite get it. The Raiden pulls back up, but another enemy plane, a Zero, sticks with the Spitfire, as it follows the other Raiden, so I try to follow the Zero to help the Spitfire. I am however of course not fast enough to keep up with the Zero, and I hope they turn so I can get into fire position, but they keep going straight. Seems though like nobody is fast enough to catch anything in this case. The Raiden outruns the Spitfire in turn quickly gets out of range of the Zero, and yes, by the way, Spitfires are faster than Zeros, something you should use when you fight Zeros in a Spitfire, and the Zero in turn is outrunning me. I spray some cannon rounds in the direction of the Zero, hoping to get it to turn so I can get closer, but the Zero keeps going. However, then it seems that the Raiden all the way in the front pulls up and starts to turn around tightly, which slows it down, and that means that the Spitfire turning after it can catch up to the Raiden, but of course also slowing down, which gives the Zero the opportunity to catch up to the Spitfire, and me to catch up to the Zero. I don't know what happened to the Raiden, but the Zero gets the Spitfire and I get the Zero seconds later and the Zero goes down. Then however, as I pull back up from my attack, I take a hit from another Zero that was coming in and I didn't notice, and that hit took out my tail control, so my little Hurricane is going down. Now, with this plane being 3.3, I can take it up right away though, and I do. However, my Shadowplay recording software crashes again shortly after, a problem I have often as of late. This time though I have to replay. Now, there wasn't that much more interesting stuff happening in this fight, and with my Shadowplay down I called it a day shortly after, but I figured since I have to replay I can show you one or two things from it. Now, I generally dislike using replays as they just aren't a 100% representation of what I saw, but if my Shadowplay keeps acting up I might have to use it every now and then. I figured though, when we take a look at the replay, I could also show you the fight versus the Hayabusa again, to show you how some of it looks from the outside. So this is where we start. Now, as you can see, the Hayabusa is coming in with at least 100 kph more than I was flying, no chance to outrun it, so when I see the Hayabusa I roll around and turn towards the Hayabusa, turning into the attack to give the attacker a bad angle. As we merge I roll the other direction and go into a barrel roll, hoping I can get the Hayabusa to overshoot in rolling scissors. A bad option versus a plane that turns better than you, but if said plane's advantage in roll rate and speed are even larger, options are limited. Now, as you can see, the Hayabusa with its better turn rate slowly gets the upper hand in rolling scissors and is about to slot in behind and get the necessary lead to fire, so I give full right rudder to push nose down and get my plane out of the enemy's line of fire and turn back into the Hayabusa. Works well the first time around, but the second time, as we saw before, I have lost too much speed, which goes faster in the Sea Hurricane than I'm used to, and I get overcritical angle of attack and the plane stalls and goes into a spin. Not a pure flat spin, luckily, and I can recover quickly from it. The Hayabusa passes me as I do so, and we both turn around to come at each other again. The Hayabusa pulling up a bit as it turns around and being a bit higher, and me going down a bit to gain some speed before we merge. Now, as we are about to merge again, I start to pull up into the Hayabusa before we merged, which gives me a bit of a head start and I can almost get my guns on the Hayabusa when we come around again, but not quite. One more round and I again almost get a shot. But only almost. Now after that I pull up to turn around expecting the Hayabusa to also turn back into me again, but he keeps going and I fall behind. Now after that we had our short little chase and the Hayabusa turned around and goes after the Spitfire. I try to get a shot from the side, but don't quite get it. And the Hayabusa is turning after the Spitfire. Meanwhile I go up vertical to get above the two. As they turn below me I bring the nose around and I can drop down behind the Hayabusa and get in fire position as we have seen before. Now, as I've said, there was not too much more interesting stuff happening in this fight, but since I have taken a look at the replay anyway to see if there was something worth showing in it, I figured the fight in the Hayabusa would be nice to see from the outside as well. Now, as I have said, I usually don't like using replays and I won't do a fight from a replay alone, unless I really have to because Shadowplay failed to record something really good. However, what I do want to ask is if you might want to see some fights like this one versus the Hayabusa on occasions from both the live recording as well as the outside view from the replay as seen here. Let me know what your opinion on this is. Well, and this is it for this video. As always, I hope it was entertaining, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time.